UFOs, they aren't just on the radars of conspiracy theorists anymore. Even the US military seems increasingly uneasy with these unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs. But this is hardly an American problem, with defense departments around the world buzzing at the blips on their radar. Some of these UFO encounters have been so terrifying that it even prompted one of America's most bitter enemies to contact it for help, and some have even proven deadly. That's right, something is happening up there, and even the US Air Force has had to admit that an unknown radar contact had destroyed one of its fighters, killing its crew. These are some of the most terrifying military UFO encounters in history. We start with the USS Blue Ridge incident. The USS Blue Ridge is one of the Navy's most advanced command and control ships, featuring state-of-the-art technology. This amphibious command ship is the flagship of the mighty 7th Fleet and features a flight deck used by helicopters and VTOL aircraft. It's one of the Navy's most potent warships. Foreign hostile powers are definitely interested in its capabilities, and in 2008 it's possible that something very foreign and perhaps non-human took an interest in the Blue Ridge as well. The incident's relayed via Bob McGuire, who claims to have been stationed aboard the Blue Ridge at the time of the incident. At the time, the Blue Ridge was sailing from Thailand to Vladivostok when it ran into a raging typhoon with 90-knot winds and waves reaching as high as 40 to 50 feet. U.S. warships are built to plow straight ahead through even the mightiest typhoons, though, so the crew showed little concern and continued on through the storm. Suddenly, though, the bridge crew realized that despite the heavy rain all around the ship, no rain appeared to be hitting the ship itself. It was as if someone had opened a giant umbrella up over the ship. Looking up into the sky above the ship, a faint glow was visible through the clouds, and eventually the clouds parted enough to see numerous lights on what appeared to be a solid flat surface, an object so big that it perfectly covered the entire ship. The object then grew brighter and brighter before suddenly shooting straight upwards and disappearing, allowing the rain to start hitting the ship once more. Having a gigantic craft hovering over one of the US Navy's most advanced ships is certainly a terrifying and humbling experience, but did the Blue Ridge really have an encounter with a UFO? The story is ambiguous. There are no further witnesses to the event that have come forward. That in itself is not all that strange, as military witnesses have shown themselves to be extremely hesitant to speak about their UFO experiences for fear of professional reprisal. But a search for Bob McGuire revealed little except for a separate UFO encounter by another Bob McGuire, who claims to have been on a nuclear submarine in 1990 that was buzzed by a submerged UFO moving faster than the speed of sound. It's unknown if these two are the same person, and in the span of a naval career it is not impossible for a sailor to serve aboard a nuclear submarine and then an amphibious command ship, though it does stretch believability for one person to have two incredible UFO encounters a decade apart. But what about the Blue Ridge itself? The story claims that the Blue Ridge was on port calls at the time, and after leaving Thailand was on its way to Vladivostok. Looking back at US Navy service records proves that the Blue Ridge had in fact visited Thailand on a port visit on May 1, 2008. However, on May 10th it was in Singapore. After that it departed for Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and finally Japan. There is no mention of a Vladivostok, though, nor are there any records of the Blue Ridge ever traveling there. In fact, no one has ever traveled to Vladivostok because it doesn't exist. It is possible that in the original telling someone simply misspelled the Russian city of Vladivostok, which does exist, and the internet has recycled the same bad spelling in every fresh telling of the story. U.S. ships have, in fact, conducted port calls in the Russian port city of Vladivostok, including one in 2012. Several senior Navy officers were relieved of duty after going on a drunken rampage through the city. But the Blue Ridge only visited Vladivostok in 2007 and 2010, not 2008, when the alleged incident took place. And in that 2007 visit, the Blue Ridge did not visit Thailand as claimed. So this could be an honest error either in whoever first recorded the story or in the telling, though one would hope a bridge officer would know exactly when and where his ship was at all times. However, with little verification of the event, it's best to take this story of a UFU, that's an unidentified flying umbrella, by the way, with a huge grain of salt. But next we'll look at an encounter that is even stranger than what the Blue Ridge experienced, and with more evidence to back it up too. Iran is no stranger to UFOs, and the stories that have come out of the ultra-conservative country have been hair-raising to say the least. But even more importantly, the sources for many of these stories are very trustworthy. With the ever-present fear of US drones and planes in their skies, Iran is extremely sensitive to sightings of unidentified aircraft over its airspace. Sometimes those really are American spycraft, but sometimes there's something else altogether, and sometimes they can even prove deadly. This story comes from Combat Aircraft Monthly, a military aviation magazine whose journalists are all well respected within the aviation community. This particular article was written by Babak Tagvai, a writer who has written extensively on the Iranian Air Force and is considered very credible. According to Tagvai's sources, in 2012, Iran detected what they assumed to be American drones approaching one of their nuclear sites. An F-14, a holdover from the days of the Shah, was dispatched to identify and intercept the suspected drones. However, shortly after takeoff, the F-14 suddenly exploded, killing both crew members. An Iranian investigation would find no cause for the tragedy, though it's important to remember that these are very old aircraft and Iran has been cut off from replacement parts for them by the US since the revolution. The nation has been forced to cannibalize other F-14s and smuggle in American components when possible to keep a dwindling number of them operational. This explosion could have been caused by a disastrous mechanical failure of some kind, though it would have to have been truly disastrous to cause the aircraft to simply explode. But what's so interesting about this story is Iran's official description of what it believed at the time to be CIA drones. According to Iranian sources, the drones displayed, quote, astonishing flight characteristics. They were able to fly outside of the atmosphere and cruise at Mach 10, while also coming to a complete stop over their target. They also used extremely powerful electromagnetic countermeasures to jam radars and disrupt navigation systems of Iranian aircraft. They were also brightly illuminated, which Iran believed was being done to enable the drones to photograph their targets. Of course, these are capabilities well outside of what even the most advanced drones are capable of, so you might think that the Iranians were incorrectly reporting what they had seen. But strangely, those supposed CIA drones were exhibiting the exact same flight characteristics observed by American military personnel over their own naval ships and sensitive installations. There would be no official explanation from Iran over the nature of the bizarre unidentified objects, and this wasn't even the first time Iran had encountered similar UFO types. In 2004, Iranian radar and witnesses on the ground spotted a luminous object over the Arak nuclear facility. Fearing that it was an American spy craft of some kind, Iran dispatched an F-14 to intercept it and shoot it down. As the pilot approached, he described the object as spherical, with what appeared to him as a green afterburner that created a huge amount of turbulence behind it as it moved through the sky with the F-14 in pursuit. The pilot attempted to get a radar lock in order to fire on the object, but the airplane's radar beam was disrupted and a lock was impossible. Before the F-14 could gain on it, the strange object put the pedal to the metal and took off, moving so quickly that the pilot described it as, quote, disappearing like a meteor. Even earlier than that, though, Iran was tangling with UFOs, and these couldn't have possibly been American craft. Not only were they what Iranian pilots reported far outside the possibility of even today's technology, but back in pre-revolution Iran in 1976, the US and Iran were still on good terms. This story has even more credence than the others, since Iran invited a US Air Force officer to be debriefed on the details, likely in an attempt to get help in dealing with the situation. USAF Section Chief Lieutenant Colonel Olin Mui then wrote a memorandum on the details which remained unclassified. That report details the following. On September 19, 1976, 4 Tehran residents called the Mehrabad airport to ask about a bright light in the sky. The airport's radar was under repair at the time and not operational, prompting a military officer to contact Sharoki Air Force Base and ask them what they saw on their radar. The Air Force Base had nothing on its radar, though, so the reporting officer, a General Yousefi, went outside to look for the object himself. He quickly spotted the bright light in the sky, which was starting to garner a lot of public attention. The general contacted the Air Force Base again and ordered an F-4 Phantom to be sent up to take a look at the object. The F-4 was piloted by Lieutenant Yadi Nazari and a backseat weapons officer. As Nazari got near the object, but before he could get close enough for a look, his instruments and communications all suddenly went out, prompting him to turn around and head back to base. Once he got away from the object, his comms and instruments came back to life. 10 minutes later, a second F-4 was dispatched. Lieutenant Parvis Jafari spotted the object in the distance and acquired a radar lock at 27 nautical miles. Some reports state the object had a radar signature similar to a KC-135 Stratotanker, but this is a later addition to the story and not in the original report. What we do know is that Jafari got close enough to witness an object with lights that alternated strobing in blue, green, red, and orange at such speed that all the colors were visible simultaneously. Jafari pursued the object until it seemed to spit out a second, smaller bright object, which headed straight for Jafari. He armed an AIM-9 Sidewinder and attempted to engage the smaller object, but suddenly he lost all communications and his weapons console went down. Turning around and giving up the chase, he witnessed the object return to the mothership, while a second object came out of the mothership and went straight down to the ground, leaving a bright tail in the sky and lighting up a huge area of the ground. Jafari's aircraft experienced further electronic problems as he returned to base, and a civilian airliner in the vicinity that hadn't spotted the UFO also reported having electronic issues. The following day, Jafari and his weapons systems officer were taken by helicopter to try to find the location of the second object's possible impact on the ground. However, they found no evidence of any kind of impact, but did pick up beeping from a radio transponder that they couldn't locate. The occupants of a home near where the radio transponder was apparently signaling from also reported they had seen a bright flash of light during the night and heard a loud noise. So, we know that an encounter of some kind really did take place, but how true are the details? Was it really a UFO? Westinghouse technicians working with the Iranians on their Phantoms did not report servicing the first aircraft after the incident. Though they were asked to look at the second aircraft, that aircraft was known to have intermittent electrical outages that continued to elude a solution. The technicians stated that the Iranians were known to perform low-quality maintenance work, which could explain the power outages experienced by the Phantoms. The radar on the second Phantom needed to be adjusted a month after the incident, something skeptics have pointed out as a probable reason for a malfunction that faked the recorded radar contact. However, an adjustment doesn't necessarily mean the radar was completely inoperable, and none of the American technicians working with the Iranians at the time ever offered a bad radar as the cause of the recorded radar contact. The smaller craft that the second Phantom encountered could have been explained away as meteors by skeptics, and it is true that pilots have taken evasive action against meteors before. However, Jafari specifically stated that he watched the first object rejoin the apparent mothership, changing directions after coming straight at his aircraft. This is something a meteor can't do, though the night in question was a night that the Earth was experiencing a meteor shower. Perhaps both can be true. Jafari and his weapons systems officer really did see a smaller object detach from the mothership and briefly pursue their aircraft, and then mistook the second object that fell to the ground for just a regular meteor. The apparent radio beacon that the UFO left behind was probably exactly that, a regular old radio beacon, though definitely not left behind by a UFO, and not even on the night of the encounter. American C-141s at the time were experiencing difficulties with their transponders, which are meant to be jettisoned in case of a crash. However, flying over turbulent skies over the mountains of Tehran, C-141s had their transponders knocked loose by turbulence. The beacon likely had been working for days or weeks but not discovered simply because nobody was looking for it, and it was only an investigation into a possible UFO crash that got the proper technology in the range of the beacon to pick up its faint signal. But while the Iranian pilots survived their mysterious 1976 encounter, a pair of American aviators wouldn't be so lucky when they also encountered an unknown radio contact. On the night of November 23, 1956, U.S. Air Defense Command picked up a mysterious blip directly over Lake Superior and immediately dispatched an F-89C Scorpion fighter jet from Truax Air Force Base in Madison, Wisconsin. The plane was being flown by First Lieutenant Felix Moncla, an experienced pilot with 811 flight hours, with Second Lieutenant Robert Wilson on the radar. The Scorpion had great difficulty tracking the object, which appeared to be changing direction and course. With the aid of ground control, however, the Scorpion was vectored into the object's location. Once close enough, the Scorpion made visual contact and gave chase, pursuing the object for 30 minutes and gradually closing the distance between them. As they chased, the object changed altitudes from 25,000 to as low as 7,000 feet. Watching on their radar screens, ground control noted the Scorpion finally catching up to the object 70 miles off Keweenaw Point in Upper Michigan, at an altitude of 8,000 feet. Suddenly, the two distinct radar blips of the Scorpion and the unknown object merged together into one. The F-89's radar return simply disappeared according to the official accident report. Its IFF transponder had suddenly gone offline. The second object was seen simply continuing its course until it was out of radar range. A search for wreckage was not successful, and even after the summer snowmelt, no wreckage was ever discovered. We know this incident happened. There is an official Air Force accident report which, curiously, has 99 typed characters excised from the original report at the exact point where the radar contacts merging is discussed. Further, under the recommendations for action to prevent similar accidents, part of the report there are two lines which have also been blacked out. The Air Force would pull a Roswell on this one, initially releasing an official news release stating the Scorpion had been lost while merging with an unknown object. Not long after, the Air Force retracted that story and instead stated that the missing Scorpion had intercepted a Canadian C-47 transport that had veered off course. After the intercept, the pilot was believed to have possibly been stricken by a completely random bout of vertigo and promptly smashed his plane into the lake. Canada immediately refuted the Air Force account and showed that there had been no Canadian flights in the area that evening. The US then told Canada to kindly shut up when it's trying to lie to the American people, and two different Air Force representatives told the pilot's widow two different and contrasting explanations for his death. In one, the plane had smashed into the lake while flying too low, and in the other, the jet had exploded at high altitude. Project Blue Book, which was the code name for the U.S. Air Force's study of UFOs, would come along to give everyone the definitive, please don't ask the Canadians on this one, official answer. They supported the conclusion that the Scorpion had completed an interception of a Canadian aircraft, which, remember, Canada explicitly denied because they had no aircraft in the air at the time. On the way back, the pilot got about a vertigo and crashed his plane into the water. Everyone was happy with this story, except maybe the pilot's widow, who now had been given 3 different reasons for her husband's death by the Air Force. The National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena took slight issues with the official account, finding some peculiarities in the Air Force official explanation. Like the fact that Canada admitted it had 0 planes in the air. Its own investigation discovered that the mission had been completely expunged from official records, with no further explanation on why. So, what really happened that night? There is no doubt the weather was rough, and early jets did not enjoy the computer-assisted control that modern jets do. Listen, when the Air Force lies 3 times, lies for Canada, only to have Canada bring the receipts and expunges official records, well, we're not saying a UFO destroyed a US jet or knocked it out of the sky, but we know for a fact a Canadian plane didn't. Now go watch Largest UFO Sighting in History, or click this other video instead.